Hello everyone, we're now on our week 7, and this week that we will be gradually moving on from the fundamental introduction and infrastructure of the industries into deeper analysis and understanding for individual industries. So actually this week will be on music and next week will be on film. So the topic today that we will look at would be global music industries past and present. So the reason why that I would like to introduce you not just the present but also the past was that through this that I'm hoping that we're able to have a look at how an industry can be shaped or reshaped throughout the history, which brings changes into its product and how they're produced and then how they're consumed actually. So let's just get started here. So here's the outline for the lecture today. So first of all, that we'll be looking at the short economic history of music. So in this part that we will be exploring that how music is an economic good and an economic product which can be produced in various different forms. And throughout this time that we will also have a look at has an industry been reshaped in different ways. And then the next thing that we'll get into would be the question of what is the product, because now that you probably can already relate that the product of music has not always been the same thing. It could have different forms, it could have different shapes, it could be tangible, or sometimes it's not even, tangible. So at the end of the lecture, that we'll also be watching the video together, which will bring us to the discussion of how to make money with music. And not necessarily just music, but I think that we can also think about other kind of cultural product and some other creative industries. So for those of you, I know that there might be one or two students that have taken the course on global music industry. This is actually one of the sessions that the content will have certain, overlapping. So I don't want you to feel bored right now, but if you think that some of this has already been covered in another module, that I would strongly encourage you to try to put on, a lens of specifically, starting from creative industry rather than just music as an industry on its own, but just to think further about how the things that we are going to cover today would actually have something in common with some of the other industries as well. So by the end of the session today, that I would like us to be able to, think about, firstly, the development of music as a business in the West. So the reason why that we're actually focusing on the West is that, so as you know now that there are a lot of developments in terms of laws, in terms of, the definition of intellectual property, and then also the industrial practices of producing, mass-produced cultural products. The West still has certain, power over some other, countries and destinations. So the reason why we're looking at the West right now is not because that we're only looking at it. So as you know that in the later second half of the term that we will be covering the case studies of creative industries in different countries, including Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. But now that we're looking at what brought us here, so that we'll be tracing back to, the Western history a little bit today. And so with the understanding of how it was developed and how those infrastructures have come to place, we can actually take another look at the picture that we're in right now with a more critical lens. And that's kind of my expectation for all of us. And secondly, that after the session, I would like us to be able to identify stakeholders, organizations, and lawsuit cases which are significant in this development processes. This is actually quite a big goal because you'll see that we are actually going to start our discussion of music as an economic good from more than 5,000 years ago. So that's a long period of time. So it's got to be a lot of changes in this development processes. So let's just look forward to it. This is going to be quite an intense session. Thirdly, that I would like us to come out of this session with an understanding of the basic structure of music industries and the sounds of mainstream music today. So by the sounds of mainstream music today, it's not necessarily that we all walk out of this session knowing that what's the most, trendy kind of music right now. But I would like you to understand that how this sounds might have something to do with the structure, might have something to do with, the fundamental building of the music industries from day one to now, and how that might lead to a particular type of sound being produced, which can be analyzed in the forms of styles, genres, or even languages that ally with the pop music. So we are starting here with an example of a poet, Pindar. So Pindar is an ancient Greek lyric poet. So you may wonder that how is this person relevant to the discussion today, since that he died 400 BC, which is like a long time ago. The reason why that Pindar has been used as an example here today is that historically he was one of the earliest person that now we can trace back to, which has been commissioned to produce music, dance, and performances. So this is an example of how music, or for this case, it's actually a wider range of performing arts being produced for the rich and powerful classes, which we often refer them to as patrons. So that was the relationship between the creative and also the ones that want those products, which are their clients or patrons at the time. So this example actually showed the earliest form of relationship between the two. So we are now starting to discuss the short economic history of music. It will be separated into 5 stages, and then the Pindar example would be, highlighting what that relationship is like in the stage of music patronage, which is, the earliest that we can trace back to till the end of the 18th century. So as you can see, this is like a really, really long time. Secondly, that we'll be moving on to music publishing. So music publishing today, that when we think about it, we still think of it as a more recorded music industry centered form. So we think about performance right, we think about royalties, we think about, synchronization and different kind of, means of music being used. But back in the time, it wasn't actually the case. So I'm not going to tell you directly what it is, but we'll be moving on to that. And later on would be mass media and radio stations. At the time, as you can see, that broadcasting system has been dominating how music is consumed. And later on, we'll cover recorded music industry, and then move on to digital music industry. So each of these stages actually have, you can imagine that the people, the creators, and the business there encountered a lot of changes which are fundamental. It could be technological, and it could have something to do with, politics, and then also the societal changes, actually. So we will be covering all that today, and we're starting with music patron. We already covered a little bit of it with the Pindar example. So now I'm getting a little bit deeper into the medieval period to Renaissance. So you might have all studied in history classes in high schools or even junior high school. So back in the medieval period, that there were court festivals that in many different empires in the in Europe. So, for example, in Holy Roman Empire, there was this one emperor, Leopold the First, that during his own wedding, that he staged 2 days of opera performances. So at that time, for this type of court festivals, that they will usually find a composer, or it's actually not just composer, but also an artistic director who is able to deliver the composition and then also the production of it, and basically make sure that the performance will be there and ready on the days of their preference. So, and at the same period of time, outside of the court, there were also other organizations that are powerful and have influence on how music is produced and consumed. And as you can imagine already, it's the Roman Catholic Church. So inside of the churches, that music education is important because there is need for that. There's need for music in the abbeys. There is need for music in gatherings. So at the time that later on we'll get to that, how many composers throughout the history of Western classical music have actually been, educated and trained in church. And later on, they actually have the career path to be hired by the church as well. So that's why the church has been influential to the development of music. And in terms of music, that at the time that there is sacred music, which is mainly created in the church, and profane music, which is created mainly outside of the church. It could be folk music, it could be grassroots music that musicians or people are just enjoying in their everyday life outside of church. And there is this tendency that singers are usually raised and also nurtured in church because of the church's need for choir. And for the music instrumentalist, that a lot of them were nurtured and trained in court, because for court festivals and then also some ceremonies that needed in court, that instrumentalists were much more needed. So it was not until around 1637 that performing arts has become a business as we know it today. So at the time that there was a carnival, and it was the first time in the history, operas are not commissioned by patrons as they probably had always been up to that point. So for the carnival, that organizers would have to finance a production of an opera and the performances of it, and then ensure that there is return somehow, so that they won't be just losing resources and money. So that was actually a very significant point in the history where performing arts, and for this example here, which is opera, that has become an economic good in a different type of way. It's no longer just the rich and the powerful in the palace, in the in the court, will be interested in commissioning it, but there will be other roles and other people and other groups interested in staging them. I want to invite you to take a look at Handel, composer that you might know. And then the reason why we're looking at him right now is that we are also, from last week that we've been discussing the role of creative labor and what's the significant, features and distinctive features about them. And obviously that as many of you have reflected on it and expressed your opinions, that we can't actually put all the creatives into the same buckets. There's no way that it works. There are just too many, different categories, and there are too many different, possibilities in terms of what their day-to-day labor would involve. But we can also look at a specific example to examine that how those theories and then how those concepts would be relevant or not at all. And today we're looking at Handel and also his career trajectory. His career trajectory actually also shows the changes of the period of time that we just mentioned, how that music has been commissioned from patrons and moving on to, forming business entities. So Handel was born in 1685, and then he moved from Hamburg in Germany to London in 1712. And then he became a music director at the Royal Academy of Music. Then he actually started to be part of a company called RAM. And RAM was an Italian opera production company in London. So what was his role when he was in RAM? His role included creating the repertoire, recruiting performers, musicians, and overseeing the production. So when you think about it, it's like a lot of work to do. It's not just creating the product, but also ensuring that it's performed in a way that he intends it to be. And then also ensuring that, the production has been done with the quality that he prefers. And so when we look at his career trajectory, we've seen a church organist moving on, becoming a court musician, which was still in the time that he was in Germany. And then he moved to London and decided that he wants to be a freelancer. And then he became a music director in the music academy. And then he actually became what we may refer to an entrepreneur or a founder of the company at the time, who's responsible of the cash flows, income streams, and then revenue and so on and so forth. So that actually also highlights how music as an economic good has been changed throughout that period of time. But I want you to take a look at another example, which is Joseph Haydn. Haydn is another well-known composer that you probably are really familiar with. That he was born slightly later than Handel, but his career trajectory has been a bit different because he stayed in court and served the royal palace and the rich for a longer period of time. Believe it or not, even serving the court at the time that there was contract signed, which is, it's actually supposed to be that way. But I want you to take a look at Haydn's contract with one of his client. So his client is called His Serene Princely Highness. So the contract, part of it actually said that they said vice chapel master shall be under permanent obligation to compose such pieces of music as His Serene Princely Highness may command, and neither to communicate such new compositions to anyone, nor to allow them to be copied, but to retain them wholly for the exclusive use of His Highness. Nor shall he compose for any other person without the knowledge and gracious permission of His Highness. So this looks dense, but basically what's said here is that, first of all, Haydn is under permanent obligation to compose exclusively for his client. And then also he's not allowed to communicate these new compositions to anyone and they can't copy it. So these compositions are solely and exclusively owned by his client. And then also he cannot compose for anyone else. And there is actually another clause which covered that Haydn has to come to a place to receive orders for what kind of musical piece that he will be composing next and should be composing next as part of his obligation and duty. And so when you think about it, this is not a very good contract, isn't it? That his composition, and as we can all remember from the previous lectures, that one thing interesting about creative industry is that sometimes the product would be considered as having some things that conserve the public good. So that is actually why that copyrights end eventually, even though that the length has been increased and increased and increased, but it ends because it is seen as that there is value to free those products from monopoly. But for this contract that you're seeing right now, that there is no communication in terms of the period of time at all. It was just the work would just be owed solely to the client. So it's actually contradicting some of the things that we believe in today. So the example I think I would like to share with you was just comparing this kind of different mode and how musicians as a creative worker, as a creative labor, might be encountering different kind of situations during those transitional period. Other than the opera that we've already spoke about, other form of music has also been changing. So for chamber music, orchestra, and sonata, we also seen that there is a process that the business model has been moved gradually to ticketed concerts and then also performances organized by people that are interested in it, by the composers themselves, or by societies with middle class people. So one of the interesting example, and one of the earliest actually, is the Bach Abel concerts. So those concerts took place in Castle House in London, which still exists today, and you can see a photo of it that's still there. And it was organized by Abel and then Bach. So this Bach is not J.S. Bach, but his son, Johann Christian Bach, who also moved to London for his musical career. That at the time that Bach has already moved to London, as I said, but previously that he was a church organist at Milan in Italy. So yeah, he's another example after Handel that, musicians moving to London. And Bach Abel concerts was seen as one of the earliest bourgeois music events, which served specifically for the rising middle class who are, not, the traditional, typical royal class, or the families are related to, the royalties, but it's a rising class with more cultural capital and some economic capital that are willing to, spend time and money to listen to music. And also another thing that was happening at the later half of that century was that the professional orchestras have been formed. This has something to do with, interestingly, French Revolution. At the time that we see court orchestra was dismissed because court and royals were basically rejected and abandoned. So we see in 1830, Royal Philharmonic Society founded in London, and then also we've seen in 1850, that was the first professional orchestra was also funded. Professional orchestra, it means that at the time that you rely on ticket sales fully, rather than receiving fund or having the patronage relationship to the court or some other, parties. Well, it was not until 1987 that our NSO, National Symphony Orchestras, was founded in Taiwan. Well, but in terms of the revenue streams and then their income source, today most of the orchestras, many of them would actually have funding from the governments, from the public sectors to support, performance arts. So it's not always rely on the ticket sales fully, but partly. This is what gradually being changed today. But at that point of time where professional orchestras were just firstly founded, yes, the really important thing that we look into would be that its ability to sell tickets, which distinguish it from the previous form of court orchestra. We're now moving on to music publishing, which started from this 18th century and it will last till 1920s. Around that time, music publishing was actually made possible after the Gutenberg printing in mid-1450s, because printing started to become possible, which actually made sheet music possible. So at the time, under the German Empire, between 16th and 17th century, royal approval is actually needed for printing sheet music. And then we move on to 1710. We see the first Copyright Act being established, which is the Statute of Anne. And that at that period of time, that this act actually only protect not the author, creator of the work, but the publisher. So at the time, the publisher means that the agencies or the parties printing the printed materials, regardless of if it's a book or if it's a piece of sheet music. But after this, basically standards and practices have been more in place, we witnessed the growth of commercial concerts, which also had impact from the growth of music publishing, meaning more sheet music being printed. And there is also the need for the commercial concerts, which goes hand in hand with what we just mentioned, the decline of the royals. And there is also a wider kind of international dynamic, which made printed sheet music even more in demand. In 1814 to 1815, there was a Congress of Vienna took place after the French Revolution and the Napoleon War, which means that at the time the continental Europe actually is in need of a new kind of diplomatic relations and a new kind of orders to maintain peace. So it is one of the most important international conferences in European history. At the time that there was diplomats and there were ballroom dancings and there was music for the social occasions needed. So Jonas Strauss I has this case of conducted and performed it many times each night during the period of time. So he had to rush from coffee shops to ballrooms to restaurants. So when you think about it, it was actually no different than session musicians today, that the more sessions that you can get, the more pay that you get, so you'll rush from one place to another. So that was actually another case that we can witness that how printed music is even more needed, and then also more and more musicians are instrumentalists or singers were in need of that so that they're able to perform and sing. But here it comes a point of conflict that we'll cover a few points of conflict in the history today. At that time, sheet music publishers started to ask the question of why is there unauthorized sheet music everywhere. And in 1809, that the first time that there is law directly protects the authors, which is called the Baden Civil Code. And it also led to what happened in 1837, which is the Persian Copyright Act, started to include the intangible products to also have to be protected by the law. But at the same time, there's actually another point of conflict when the composers started to ask questions about why do they have to pay when their compositions were being played in public. So you can see that music publishing, composers, and live performances seem to have this relationship at the time being formed, but the relationships had some tensions in terms of who should be paid and how much. So this point of conflict, we can see that the creators of the pieces started to feel that, well, this sheet music being printed, do I get something? And then my music has been played in all those ball dancing rooms in Vienna, but I don't seem to receive reward. So in 1847, we've seen a lawsuit which is started by a composer who ended up to be one of the earliest founders of SACEM. SACEM was founded in 1850, which is the Society of Authors, Composers, and Publishers of Music in France. And well, actually, it is in France now. And one of the things that it had been promoting since then was performance fee. So it means that when a piece of music that's being performed, that there should be some fee that goes to the creator. SACEM still exists today, and they're doing actually more and more because, back at that time, there wasn't even a recorded music industry. That music just can't be recorded because there's no such technology. And so for those of you who are interested in organizations and what are the roles that they might play in the history of creative industries, I would encourage you to take a look at the history of SACEM in your own time. So Tin Pan Alley. Tin Pan Alley was a street in New York. For those of you who have visited, that you must have recognized that. How well, now it's not really like that anymore, but back in the 1860s, that it was a street full of music publishers, and it was known for that. And one thing interesting about that, for those of you who knows music industry a little bit better, you know the role of artist repertoire. Today that we look at A&R manager as someone who look out for the talents and also nurture the talents and bring out the best of the talents, and then make sure that their work, regardless of if it's a performance or if it's a recording, that fit the image really well, and then ensure that the markets would like it. But at the time, as we said, that there is no recording technology available yet, so there was contact men that brought the sheet music from one place to another, specifically in the US, because that's where the center of music publishing business is. And they just travel, and they usually know how to play the piano, they know how to sing or some other instruments, so that they could demonstrate that, look, this piece of music is good and I want to sell you sheet music. They were called song pluggers, which is a career, an occupation that we no longer see today anymore. But it was there because of, the stage of music publishing used to be sheet music based. So there was this song called All By Myself by Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin was one of the American composers and lyricists that sold the most copies of sheet music, which is 2.4 million, and that's quite a lot. In 1877, Thomas Edison created the phonograph. So this was going to gradually create a big change for the whole industry, or even what this industry even involved. Because prior to this point, that there is no recorded music, there's no such technology. And even Thomas Edison himself wasn't able to actually, precisely predict the use of phonograph. Of course, as an inventor, he thinks it's such a great thing, but he described the phonograph as something which can be a tool for letter writing, audiobooks, a tool to help the blind learn, debate training, family records, and preserve the language. And he was actually mentioning copying music as a really, really minor possibility for it. But as you can see now, all of his imaginations come true, but copying music has probably been the major use of the phonograph. So when this technology is ready, it comes another point of conflict, where the sheet music publishers started to ask that why didn't we get paid why recorded labels recorded the work we held copyrights for? They don't think that it is fair, and so they started to lobby until, they have their success until 1909. The US Copyright Act have said that if there is any piece of record being sold, 2 cents should go to the publisher. So you see that at the time, the law was quite in a way specific. So regardless of the content, it's 2 cents to the publisher, so that the sheet music publishers can still have some, income. And also at this point of conflict, what we can see is that the foundation of mechanical copyright society in the UK being, built in 1924. So, and also that it combined with the performance rights society, which established prior to this. Mechanical copyright has become a thing when the copyrighted material has become something that is physical, which did not exist prior to this. And so we see that these two organizations come together. It's because that there is need to merge, or just to integrate those organizations to make better sense of how music is actually being used in a live setting or in the setting of recorded music. So we see publishers and collecting societies coming together and negotiate that how that they could be, working together to ensure that people get paid. And then in this negotiation process, we see that they play different roles. Now we're moving on to the next stage, which is the mass broadcasting and radio from 1920s to 1950s, which was made possible by the previous invention of the phonograph, as we mentioned. So just after World War I, that we've seen the growth of the recording industry has slowed down due to the war. At the time, we've seen nationalizations of record companies, including the companies in Germany and in France, and then also in the UK as well. Because during the wartime, that the governments consider that there is use for such companies and their technologies, and most of them are actually using it for propaganda. So at the time, we see the U.S. recording industry grew because it wasn't actually, not until later, part of this, a player in this European-led World War I. So it just had the room to grow, coinciding with the fact that a lot of patent of the recording technologies has expired. So it means that more and more companies can make use of those patents to create new technologies or, products, which are, free for them to, make use of the patent and to produce, to make profits. So we see the growth in America, but but the slowing growth in Europe at the time. And we see that we see the era of radio has come. In 1929, Radio Corporation of America, RCA, acquired Victor Talking Machine, which is a recording label. Why is it acquiring it? Because it has the recording studios and equipment in place. And in 1931, that we also see Gramophone Corporations and Columbia Gramophone Corporation founded Electrical and Musical Industries, which is EMI. And then also we see Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS, acquire Columbia Gramophone. So basically what you can see is that the companies relevant to radio industries have becoming more and more powerful. And they acquire recording labels so that they could have, first of all, the production units. And then second of all, probably some of the, rights and for some catalog. And at that time, that BMI, Broadcasting Music Incorporated, also was founded. That at the time that it was founded to basically collect performance fee for the repertoires being played on the radio. It comes another point of conflicts at this point, which is the recording industry started to ask that what do we get when radio stations broadcasted our music, and which led to the foundation of BMI, as we already covered. But at the time that German records boycotted the radio stations, they do so by they want to retract their records, and they ask to reduce the hours of the radio station playing the music that they have right over, and they demand them to be played for only an hour per day maximum. So what we can see is that at the time, the recorded music industry doesn't actually believe in that the radio could promote their music. It is a lot different than what happened next, because in the US at least, that there was a period of time that later on that the labels actually have to bribe the DJs or pay for their music being played, because that's promoting the music. So, but at the beginning, that the record labels don't actually believe in that. So this is what this is actually leading to something really interesting here, which is the foundation of IFPI. So in 1933, that due to Nazis' occupation in Germany, their radio station was nationalized. And so as the other, so when it's nationalized, that the Nazis government decided that they will make use of whatever music they want, and they won't be paying fee, because that's what the country demanded. Unfortunately, other European radio stations also followed that. It means that they stopped paying for the music that they play, even though that BMI and the need for that has been mentioned and founded before that, but they just decided to stop during kind of like wartime again. So in 1933, the International Federation of Phonographic Industry, IFPI, was founded. Even till today, if you want to look up to any statistics in the recording music industry, you will always come to IFPI report, because they are the organizations which have locations worldwide to collect those data. And so we see that the radio continued to grow. So music industry seems to be like a radio, led by the radio industry. Till the end of World War II, we see that ads of live performances have become the important streams of income for the radio stations, because the radio station broadcasted live music performance, live music performance, but most of the time recorded and then broadcasted on their stations. Well, the radio continued to grow for another reason, which is related to the development of technology. So you know that there is different frequencies for the radio stations, which are AM and FM. So the FMs continue to grow. It means that the spectrums, the limitations of spectrums, have been broader. Actually have been released a bit. It means that there are more frequencies for people to use, so that there are many more radio stations could be funded. And because there are more radio stations funded, so there was actually an increased need for different kind of music, such as R&B music, rhythm and blues. So at the time, R&B music at the time is not contemporary R&B that we listen to these days. R&B music at the time pretty much cover many kind of repertoires and genres that were predominantly produced by African American artists, or that is relevant and to the African American cultures. So, which can be, exemplified by the work of Billie Holiday in Capitol Records. So Capitol Records was actually a really small records to begin with, but because that it's collaborations with radio stations that also need this repertoire, R&B music became, a genre recognized by the Billboard chart, and then also Billie Holiday had this song, Traveling Light, which was the Billboard R&B chart #1. So we can see that how the growth of radio also led to growth of specific type of genres and making it known. And then later on, we're moving on to the recorded music industry. After the 1960s, that we see how record labels are coming back. What do we mean by is coming back? That we see that a lot more companies started to re-establish the records department to start to make music. So, for instance, Warner Brothers group, at the time that they had been producing films already, which we will come to a bit later, and they started WEA, which also later on, become the company that produced the music for The Who and Elton John and some first class artists at the time. And we also see American Broadcasting Company, ABC, which owns Paramount Pictures, film, and has held a lot of catalog for film music. They also started to develop their department to produce music, which led to Ray Charles and then also the Mamas and Papas' success in the recorded music industry. So EMI also acquire a branch in the US, which is Capitol Records that we mentioned. So EMI was a UK-based company. They also produced the work for the Beach Boys. So what's coming next? I'm trying to provide a brief and quick history and an overview of how it's all developed. So as you can see that we didn't even cover a cassette. But anyway, that vinyl and then cassette, and then in terms of the format of physical recorded music products, I want to share with you about CDs, because CDs are really important. The compact disc was actually invented way before it was popularized. It was between 1982 to 83. Both Philips and Sony's were actually jointly working on it. And then it was not actually until 1982 to 1990s, the CD sales finally in the US has increased by 100%. And so that we see that CD has become the preferred format for recorded music. And because there's new money, new capital into the market, so we also see more cases of acquisition, including Sony acquired CBS Columbia and also Columbia Picture Film Studios. So you can see that gradually this industry was led by the radio industry to begin with, and the mass communication broadcasting system next. And then it was actually the time for consumer electronics, which are, like company like Sony. And then also because it produced later on, Sony Walkman. So, actually it was before. So it dominated the production of music format indirectly for some time already. We also see Matsushita acquire MCA and Universal Studios, while Polygram sold to Universal Music. And we see that all those changes in the business world of music. We also see that in 1999, the peak of global music sales, it means the recorded music sales actually, because of the CD format and then all those trends. Why the recorded music industry peaked? That we also saw the development of TV, and MTV has become really crucial for the industry. So the TV was invented way back, but it was not popularized in households until maybe 1949. And so gradually people have TV sets in their home. And then TV has become something that, after work, that people come back and then just sit there for a while, and it became a source of household entertainment. In 1981, Warner's and RCA saw this as a potential. So they founded Music Television, which is MTV, together. And so right when MTV started and was launched, the first music video that was played on MTV was really interesting because it was a song called Video Killed the Radio Star by the Boogles. I still love this song so much. So I'm just gonna give you a link and then you can have a listen to it maybe in your own free time or just after the class. It was such a classic. And then also it was significant for that moment because it was almost like a manifesto claiming that the time for the radio has already passed, and now is the video in charge. So in 1984, we also saw that MTV founded Video Music Awards, VMA, which is still ongoing right now, that we still saw celebrities and interesting events and PR press every year that's relevant to VMA. And so what it also changes was the fundamental music as how music is being, delivered to the consumers and how it was being marketed. So after MTV, that we saw a lot of artists have started to create really polished, expensive, long form of music video. And we cannot mention this without mentioning the names of Madonna and Michael Jackson. So when you look back to the videos created at that time, we see different versions, and we see that they're glamorous, and for a reason, because MTV almost become like a channel for them to market themselves, to do their branding and also communicate their image. It's not just about the sound of music also. It's also about how it looks these days. So I also want to give you an example of that, Madonna's Like a Prayer. So it is another example after the popularization of R&B music, that how the development of music as an economic good and the technology could actually lead to the changes in terms of the content. Next, we're coming to the next stage, which is probably the one that we are most familiar with, the digital music industry. So after 2000s, I'm sure that you have heard of the service Napster, which created a lot of big changes for the industry. So Napster has, directly and also indirectly made music free. So digitalization was taking place, and then actually why music has been put into the form of compact disc. There are two, well, impacts from that. The first is that it's easier to produce and it can be mass produced, and then also it could, it create a major stream of income for those years. But also because the format is digitalized, it means that actually it lives the way for it to potentially be transferred into a form of a digital file. So gradually, it's like a two-edged sword, isn't it, to the recorded music industry when you think about it. So in 1999, the internet has already become really, popularized, and Napster was online. Napster was basically a service and a platform that would allow person-to-person sharing music file. So it means that the records label, they have no control over how those files being shared anymore. So it would lead to a direct loss of income for the rights holders. So the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA, was obviously that very alerted and also defensive for a reason. They sued Napster, and then in 2002, Napster lost the case and then they went bankrupt. But it doesn't actually stop the industries in other sectors to realize that music has become free when technologies are in place. What came after Napster was a long and painful battle for the recorded music industry. And because we're probably more familiar with this part of the history, so that's why I give it a subheading, like the rest is history. We saw in 2003, Apple Music started the first online store that sells digital music as file. It could be, singles separated, like, songs, individual songs, and it could be like a whole album. And then what came after that was streaming services, which we were probably all using right now. But we can still see that even though the recorded music industry has been, losing money after the peak in the 2000s gradually, and then still that the big three has been there. The big three includes the Universal Music Group, owned by Vivendi Group, Sony Music Entertainment, owned by Sony Corporation, and Warner Music Group, owned by Access Industries. They are still there, and now that they're actually doing better after the 2015 because they hold the right for a lot of catalog, which can be profitable again. Why, the industries have been gradually more settled with, the case negotiation being made with the streaming platforms. So we can see that 2015 is actually a big year for the global music industry in the sense that finally it's growing again. It's still far from, the peak in 2000, but it's growing. But one thing I do want to mention to you about this particular graph is that please do not be misled completely by whenever people were saying that, the digitalization killed the music industry. We have to be more precise because this music revenues was actually only, pointing out the revenue of recorded music. So it means live performance is not included and other source of income is not included, even like donations in social media and other forms of income stream is not on there. So organizations like IFPI, because it's protecting the profit and benefit for recorded music industry, it has a standard somewhere. And so when we are looking into this decline of music industry, we really do need to identify what are the music industries that we are talking about, because it doesn't always include every sector. So which comes to the next thing that I would like to encourage you to rethink the music industry. So there was this journal article which I really like, and I will be adding it up on NTU Cool for you to take a look at if you are wanting to. So Scholars Williamson and Clunan were making a point that we're not supposed to think of music industry as singular but plural, because singularity always implies that the industry is a homogeneous unit with shared objective and interest. But for the history which we covered today, you can see that it's not always like that. There are different sectors, there are different stakeholders that their interests might conflict with one another from time to time. And usually it is in that point of conflicts that new practices have to be formed. New organizations have to be established to basically react to the changes and adapt to the new developments. And new technologies have always come to challenge that as well, which we can still see that there is wide debate about, the fairness of revenues created by streams, and then also the royalties to the artist specifically or the composers, are that fair? So there's always this negotiation. It's something that can be found in different scenarios, but with the same reason throughout history. Well, and also Williamson and Clunan pointed out that there are at least 6 important reasons for reframing from using the term music industry and to move to the term music industries. This relate to history, geography, inequality, conflict, education, and policy. And there are actually a lot more discussions in detail in the reading, and I really would like you to have a look at it if you have the time. And also that for we, are currently those of us, like I know that the majority of us are in Taiwan, that if we talk about music industry as always in the form of, singularity, that the music industry, actually the center of it is always far away, is always in, the Anglophone regions, the US and the UK. So how do our music industry relate to that? And what's our relationship to it would be something that is really difficult to theorize and then to problematize. So there is also this, I think, geographical stance for us to think about music industry as hybrid, as complex, and then also as plural. So that's pretty much all I am covering today. But at the end of it, I would like us to look at a video together, which is actually an interview on the Wall Street Journal with will.i.am, the music producer, on how to make money with music. This is actually a really interesting interview. So I don't want to tell you too much before we get into the discussion of it, but I will show you the video. We'll watch it together, and then after that, it will be our discussion on Google Meet, which I'm really looking forward to. So let's watch this together, and then I'll see you later.
Another question I have is just today, Google announced a new streaming music initiative, Google Play Music All Access. They're going to be selling subscription music, streaming music on the web. I'm wondering what you think of that model of streaming music on the web. I mean, Spotify, we're seeing more and more of these services. Is this the future of music? Is this just going to be happening for the next few months and years? Or what do you think of initiatives like what Google just announced today?
Honestly, I don't really know what that means, because they're subscribing to sold music. And what if I made a song and put it on the internet tomorrow? It's Spotify doesn't spot that. So, right, we live in this connected, instant, right now world, and those services are cool for songs that were for sale yesterday. Now, just songs to listen to. Google owns YouTube. If I want to hear music, I'm just going on YouTube. So it doesn't really make sense at all, actually. I know how I listen to music, right? But I also sell music, so it's kind of weird. But I go to YouTube to hear music. I get on my iPad, I go to YouTube, I type it in, and it's there, streaming, for free. So it's kind of weird, actually.
Now, as an artist, though, how do artists make
And I
money?
got a record for sale.
How do artists make money? How do artists make money off it? From that model. I mean, how do you as an artist profit off that when people are making money or seeing your work for free on services like that?
The dirty little secret is that very, very few artists actually made a really healthy living selling records in the history of the music industry, because people forgot that the music industry was always technology. Like, people forgot that RCA was technology that Americans used in World War I and II, and then RCA became a consumer product, and then bought Victor's talking machine, and it also became our radio. And it's also the reason why artists don't get paid terrestrial radio rights in America, because it was always the lost leader. Here, 2013, if you didn't write the song and you just performed it, you don't get any money when it's played on radio. Now, if you're an act from 1960 and your song's playing on K Earth 101, and right after it is a Depends commercial, because you know exactly who the audience is, older folks, that artist isn't participating in any of the revenue, because America doesn't practice terrestrial radio rights. So you have to look at the origins of the music industry being hardware. Our music was made to sell hardware, to the point that if you sold outside of that circle, you were deemed a sellout. A sellout doesn't mean you change your morals. You sold out of the circle of things you were supposed to sell. Phonographs, record players. We could have been signed a Cadillac. There's radios in Cadillac. But that's not what we were supposed to sell. So artists are supposed to make money when they come up with other things to sell and use their music to sell it. Dr. Dre and Beats, me and I and Plus, or going out and selling out venues. You want to sell out? Sell out the Staples Center. You want to make money? Do your own festival. Write your own songs, because publishing was the first music industry. You wrote songs, they printed on sheet music, and you sold pianos, trumpets, violins, violas, tubas, oboes. And people came together to play them, and they sold out Carnegie Halls. And architects built cathedrals and theaters. Music is supposed to build bars, and you were supposed to sell other things with it. Until the music industry figures out what we're going to sell hardware, then we are just a hired gun to sell somebody else's stuff.